Anyway, after seeing how to work with the str functions, so we're going to write another kind of functions that are necessary for working inside of the classes. So as you know, the functions that we know inside of the classes are not just about init function, a string function, or represent function. We have other kinds of functions. For example, here I want to have another function inside of a class which is going to do a certain operation for me. So for example, we want to create a new function inside of a class, and here most of the classes, nearly all of the functions inside of the classes should have the argument self to be able to get the other variables inside that are defined inside of a class. And then here inside of a function we can print out for example, so here for example we can write self dot name, and then we can say was the player of, also let's add plus here, and another thing is to put it inside of parentheses, was the player of, and here we can also define another variable, team. The team of the player equals team. Also don't forget to add it in here, team. And then you can say was the player, let me also, was the player of, in here we have plus self dot team, and then plus player, for example we want to say Oliver was the player of Bayern Munich, and his height is, then we write his height plus self dot height, and there we go. So here we can also define the name Bayern Munich, and it should be inside of the quotation mark because it's a string. So here can also write print, and can write the name of the class, which was player, and then we have it here, c dot, then the function, new function. Okay, let's see what this is going to give us. Also notice that for the functions we need to have the parentheses. So here for the name and height we didn't have parentheses because they were variables, but for the functions we need to have parentheses as well. So there we go. As you can see, we have a problem here. So here the problem here is that we've put int inside of the function, which is no problem, but here because we have written it with the kind of a string format, self.height after with plus after a string, this one should be a string as well. However, we can use %, and I'm going to tell you in the next tutorials how to do that, but for now let's consider it as a string and run the code. As you can see, we have Oliver was the player of Bayern Munich, and his height is 187 185. So let me also put the spaces in here, rerun it. Okay, you can read it very well now. Oliver was a player of Bayern Munich and his height is 185. And here we've got none, and let's see what this is for. So here we have 185 Oliver, and if I comment this one, we shouldn't see none. So none here is for this function, and the reason is it writes none here is probably because it returns, this function returns nothing. It just executes the function, and there are no returning variables, and as a result you will see none here. So here if I return a variable, for example, I can write self dot name. Let's see what happens. As you can see, we will get Oliver, which is returned by this function, and so here none means the function returns nothing. There we go. So we've got familiar with the functions, how they work, how we can define variables inside of the classes, how we can define functions, what is string functions, what is init function, and what is represent function for, and how to use them in different circumstances. But before finishing the classes tutorial, I'm going to tell you some of the important things about the classes. Here, as you can see, we've used self here, but you don't have to use the variable self. You can write anything, or you can write your name. Even, for example, I can write my name, Muhammad, or Oliver, anything. You can write Oliver here instead of self. You can write any kind of variable that you like. But when we write self for the classes, this is something that most of the developers are familiar with, and they will understand that this self here is related to the class, the variable inside of the class, that all variables are going to refer to. And the other thing is that, for example, here we've defined a class using this class player here. So we've defined one object with the class, created a new object. We can edit this object. For example, we want to change the name. We want to write the last name instead of the first name. We can write c.name equals Khan inside of the quotation mark. So if I run the code, you will see that it's Khan, it's not Oliver anymore. And you can also do it for the height. So definitely I'm just saying the height out of my mind, and I'm not sure that whether it's a correct height or not. So I can, for example, somebody else tells me that his height was actually 180. So I can say that I can edit it like this, and I can save the code, rerun it. As you can see, the height changes to 180. Also, for the function, you can write kind of a new function and add it here. But most of the time, we do it for variables. And imagine that you want to delete one of these objects. For example, you want to delete C here. You can write delete in C, and as simple as that, you will remove the C object. So probably here I will face an error when printing C, because we have no object with that name. As you can see, C here is not defined. Name C here is not defined, because we've removed the C object from the class. Also notice that, for example, you can delete one of the variables of C. For example, we can delete the entire name, the name itself. So here we won't have the name here. So as you can see, player object has no attribute name. However, in this class we have name, but for this class here that we've defined out of the player, we have no name, so it starts with the height and the team. Or we can delete the team, which makes much more sense here, because we need the name and the height anyway. So team, save, and let's see if here we've got any team for Oliver Kahn. So here, because even though we haven't printed out c.team, but because we've used the team here in the new function, we face an error. So we have Kahn, we have 180, but once we were running the function, because it had the c, it didn't have any height in the c, so here we faced an error. And also notice that inside of the classes, for example, we want to define a new class, and just like the functions, the for and if and while loop, we want to leave it here and develop it later, but you want to have the class here, and for example its name is for example team, or let me define it with uppercase letter, not to be confused with this t here, team here, with the lowercase t. And simply we can write pass and then develop it later when you get to the class here. Anyway, that's it for the class tutorials. Notice that there might be a lot of more to know about classes, and that those information and those experiences are gained through getting into deeper examples of the developing softwares or getting into web development. But here, these are the important principles of the classes, and here I've removed the string and represent function, but those are also important. And by knowing all of this, you can get your hands dirty with using the classes, using the functions inside of the classes, and getting into deeper Python programming.